Welcome back, everyone, to our channel. In our last episode, we explored the period of 200 before Christ. If you missed that last episode, head over to the playlist to catch up and then come back here. But now we are diving into an unprecedented era, 100 before Christ. Europeans develop astonishingly in a short time, especially after Rome begins to gain power and influence. Let's start with the north, where the populations of the Scandinavian region still have limited involvement with other peoples. During the period between 200 before Christ and 100 before Christ, the Nor-Enos, ancestors of the Nordic peoples, inhabited the mountainous regions and fjords of the Scandinavian peninsula, corresponding to present-day Norway. They formed primitive Germanic tribes, living in coastal and inland communities dedicated to hunting, fishing, and rudimentary agriculture on difficult soils. Their society was organized into clans with local chiefs, without a centralized kingdom, and they practiced pagan rituals in sacred forests, venerating gods as precursors to Odin and Thor. Known for their skills in primitive navigation, they used wooden boats for local trade with neighboring tribes. They maintained relative isolation from the southern powers, such as Rome, with indirect contacts via amber routes. Their material culture included iron tools and burials with goods, reflecting a warrior life and seasonal nomadism. The Geti were a people descended from Germanic tribes that inhabited the region where present-day Sweden is located. Around 100 before Christ, they formed tribes with a strong agricultural and maritime tradition, living in fertile valleys, lakes, and coasts. They stood out for their society organized into clans, with local chiefs and skills in iron metallurgy. They practiced intensive agriculture, fishing in rivers and lakes, and trade in furs and amber. They developed permanent villages and the first boats for inland and coastal navigation. They venerated ancestral Nordic gods, with rituals in natural areas and rich burials. Their culture would lay the foundations for the future medieval Swedish kingdoms. Now let's talk about the Swedes. They were a large group descended from Germanic tribes that, around 100 before Christ, inhabited further northeast of the Geti, developing a growing social organization and an emerging maritime tradition. They lived in areas of dense forests, lakes, and Baltic coasts, practicing agriculture, hunting, fishing, and collecting iron from swamps. Their society was based on clans led by warrior chiefs, with tribal assemblies and the first signs of centralized royal power. They developed permanent villages and vessels for navigation on rivers and the Baltic Sea. They venerated ancestral gods of the Nordic pantheon, performing sacrifices and rituals in sacred groves. Their position favored the initial control of amber trade routes, with indirect contacts to southern Europe. The Danes were a people, also descended from northern Germanic tribes that, around 100 before Christ, inhabited the Jutland Peninsula and the Danish islands. They formed coastal tribes dedicated to navigation, fishing, and maritime trade in the North Sea and Baltic. They were known for their light vessels and skills as rowers and warriors. Their society was tribal, with local chiefs and warrior assemblies without a unified kingdom yet. They venerated Nordic gods like Odin and Thor, with rituals in sacred groves. They lived in villages of longhouses, practicing agriculture, livestock raising, and amber extraction. Their contacts with Rome were indirect, via trade with southern Germanic tribes. Further south, the Vandals were an Eastern Germanic people still in the early stages of formation, inhabiting regions between the Oder and Vistula rivers in present-day Poland. Unlike more Western groups, they remained relatively isolated from the Roman borders, with indirect contacts via amber trade. Their material culture included decorated ceramics and burials with weapons, indicating a warrior society. They divided into subgroups, such as the Hasdingi and Silingi, and practiced agriculture on fertile soils, complemented by hunting and livestock raising. They did not possess a unified kingdom, living in villages led by tribal chiefs. Their future expansion would only gain strength centuries later, as we will see in the next episodes. In present-day Russia and Ukraine, the Sarmatians were a set of Iranian nomadic tribes that dominated the Pontic steppes, between the Don River and the Danube, around 100 before Christ, similar to the Scythians, as we saw previously. Famous for their heavily armored cavalry and mounted archers, they represented a constant threat to the borders. They divided into groups such as the Roxolani, Iazyges, and Alans, each with their own kings and seasonal mobility. Their society was hierarchical, with strong female influence. They practiced horse herding, trade in furs and slaves, and raids against sedentary neighbors. They maintained alternating relations with Rome, temporary alliances, but also conflicts in the lower Danube region. Their culture left marks in rich kurgans with weapons, gold jewelry, and Hellenistic influences. Since the end of the Second Punic War in 201 before Christ, the Roman Republic experienced aggressive expansion, consolidating control over Hispania, present-day Spain and Portugal, conquered during the wars against Carthage, and annexing territories in the east, such as Macedonia after the Macedonian Wars, between 200 and 148 before Christ, which resulted in the subjugation of Greece, and the destruction of Corinth in 146 before Christ. In Africa, the Third Punic War culminated in the destruction of Carthage in 146 before Christ, transforming it into the province of Africa. In 133 before Christ, Rome also began to establish itself in the province of Asia, in Asia Minor. Politically, the period marked the peak of the Senate, but also crises, such as the agrarian reforms of the Gracchi brothers. Tiberius proposed redistribution of public lands to plebeians, being assassinated in riots. Gaius expanded rights and subsidized grain, also killed in confrontations. Prominent leaders included generals such as Scipio Aemilianus, who destroyed Carthage, and Gaius Marius, elected consul in 107 before Christ, reforming the army. Culturally, Hellenistic influence grew, with the adoption of Greek philosophy, art, and literature. Authors such as Terence and Plautus adapted Greek comedies, while architecture incorporated Hellenistic temples. The influx of slaves from conquests led to revolts, such as the First Servile Revolt in Sicily, between 135 and 132 before Christ. Tensions between Optimates and populace also intensified, foreshadowing the civil wars that would occur later. Figures such as the Gracchi and Marius acted as influential reformers in this republican era. Rome was growing with great prosperity, but this prosperity would eventually trigger future problems and conflicts. But all of this will be left for the next episodes. Thank you very much for traveling with us through Europe, getting to know different eras and cultures. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to leave a like, share, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next episodes. Be sure that they will be incredible. See you next time.